You used to call me on my cell phone, late night when you need my love. Call me on my cell.
Good evening, and welcome to the Nelson News Network. I'm Mitchell, and today I'm here to talk to you about a nationwide issue that is affecting our whole country. This issue is about forest fires. Some believe that our nation's policy should let forest fires burn, or in other words, let nature take its course, while others believe that our policies should be to extinguish the fires as much as possible. Before we delve deeper into this interesting issue, we need to learn some background information. Now I'm going to send you over to Ian, who's going to talk to you about succession.
Thanks, Mitch. You can't talk about forest fires without regarding succession in an ecosystem. Succession is a change involving a series of species replacements in a community following a disturbance. Now, there are two types of succession, primary and secondary. Primary succession occurs where there's no soil formation, like after a volcanic eruption or glacial retreat. Then after bacteria is introduced to the environment, different plants can start to grow there. Secondary succession occurs where there already is soil formation. For example, take an abandoned cornfield. After a while, if this cornfield is left unkempt, it will return back to its natural state. The new plants that start to return to this area are referred to as pioneer species. They invade and start to regrow the area. Now, here's Mitchell with the economic value of ecosystems.
Thanks, Ian. There are two main types of economic value within an ecosystem: direct value and indirect value. Direct value has to do with resources and products directly exploited and sold from an ecosystem. There are a few types of direct values. Medicinal value has to do with drugs derived from living organisms. A good example of this is the rosy periwinkle that lives in Madagascar. It has been made into two different cancer-treating drugs. Another type of direct value is agricultural value. Agricultural value has to do with crops grown and harvested. The last type of direct value is called consumptive use value. This has to do with things that, resources that we get from an ecosystem, but never take them to the market. So this is like your hunting, your fishing, picking wild berries, things like that. Indirect value has to do with cycles and processes in ecosystems that benefit humans. There's a few main types of indirect value. The first type is called biogeochemical cycles. These are things like photosynthesis, carbon dioxide cycles, the water cycle, things like that. We depend on cycles like this for fresh water, and human activity can sometimes upset or disturb these cycles and cause pollution. Technology is unable to artificially contribute or create any of these cycles, so humans need to be very cautious of their effects on ecosystems. Another type of indirect value is waste disposal. This has to do with decomposers breaking down dead organic material. This benefits humans because we dump waste into natural ecosystems every year to be decomposed. Biological communities are also capable of breaking down pollutants such as pesticides. Another type of indirect value is the provision for fresh water. The water cycle supplies fresh water to terrestrial ecosystems, and there's no substitute for fresh water. Ecosystems such as forests exert a certain sponge effect on this fresh water. They soak up the water and release it at a regular rate. This water holding capacity of forests reduces possibility of flooding. Another type of indirect value within an ecosystem is the prevention of soil erosion. Intact ecosystems retain soil and prevent erosion and carrying away of dirt. Human intervention can cause silt and dirt to be carried away after deforestation. The last type of indirect value is ecotourism. This has to do with things like vacations, bike riding, hiking, bird watching, or just immersing ourselves in the beauty and serenity of the natural environment. Now over to Joe.
Thanks, Mitchell. So, one of the main factors in forests is the type of species. There's a general niche species and there's a specific niche species. Now the general species, they have a very wide diet and they can live in a lot of different types of habitat, such as your average chipmunk. It eats whatever's on the ground basically, and it can go in any type of environment, such as small trees, big trees, wherever it wants. On the other hand, you have the specific niche species. They live in very limited habitat and they also have a very limited diet. So they can't just go out and eat whatever they want. They need a very specific organism nearby to provide them. Now, some of these species involve a wolf or a bear. They live in a very certain type of forest. They live in the innermost part of the forest. They don't live towards the edge of the habitat, so they need a very long, continuous habitat. And they also eat mainly big wild animals such as deer or what other animals they find around. Now, off to you, Louis.
Thanks, Joe. And now I'm Louie, and I'm here to talk about biodiversity and ecosystem. Biodiversity is basically the variety of species in an ecosystem, and this is heavily dependent on the amount of widespread disturbances that happen in this ecosystem. For instance, if there's a big amount of widespread disturbances, then the only types of animals or species that will be able to survive are ones with a fast growth rate and a short lifespan. But thanks, Louie. I'm Lewis, and I'm here to talk about erosion. Erosion is basically the act in which Earth is worn away by water, wind, or ice. A similar process that makes erosion happen is weathering, which is the breaking down of rock. After weathering occurs, the rock is broken down, and sediment that is left behind is carried by either the wind, water, or the ice, depending on the ecosystem. As the sediment builds up over time, it creates fertile land. Even though erosion is a natural process, humans can have a large effect on it. Trees and plants hold in soil and other things, and as humans cut down large amounts of forest, the soil is washed away or blown away a lot easier.
Thanks, Louis. So another factor is population sizes. There's two different population types. There's an exponential growth population, and there's a linear growth population. Now the linear, it just keeps going up and doesn't encounter any problems, and it keeps itself at a good, reasonable growth pace, and then eventually it levels off. Now exponential starts off slow, goes up really fast, and then crashes. Now these type of population sizes it's the type where it explodes and then immediately crashes is called an eruptive or a Malthusian population type. Also a population, you got to refer to it as all organisms within an area belonging to the same species. So it's not just every animal in the area, that would be the biodiversity. This is just one species. And the population density then is the number of individuals per unit area. So that's all we're talking about here. So now the distribution of the population also helps with the type of population, because if it's distributed across a wide area, then it will be allowed to grow bigger and survive longer because it has more resources to thrive on. Now, a smaller constrained population will use up its resources quicker and eventually crash, leading to more problems within the population, which may actually lead to extinction or at least endangerment. The most important part of a population is limiting factors. These allow the population to grow and reach a constant area, not just crash and almost go extinct or become endangered. Now off to Ian.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I'm going to talk about the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. Now, what this hypothesis states is that a moderate amount of disturbances in an ecosystem actually generates high-frequency amounts of diversity. Now, for example, abiotic factors like fire, water, weather, all of these come into play and help with the diversity factor. Now, if these natural occurrences happen in a very moderate amount, then diversity will flourish. But however, if too much or too little of these disturbances occur, it will throw off the ecosystem.
Now that you've learned all about the different types of factors that affect forests, we believe that forests such as Yellowstone and any other great national forest should have a let burn policy. We believe that as long as it is not endangering human life or property, the fires should be allowed to take their natural course throughout the parks. Now, There are many pros and cons to this type of decision, so I'm going to let Louis, Ian, and Mitchell discuss these further with you.
I'm here with two major scientists, Dr. Mitchell Morell and Ian Smith, here to talk about the pros and cons of the let burn policy. Mitchell, what are the pros about this policy?
So one pro about this let burn policy related to economic value is that it's going to save money that the government is currently spending on extinguishing these forest fires. It will also enable processes and cycles in the ecosystem to not be affected as much. Nature will be taking its course and the environment will be benefited as a whole.
Well, to contradict that argument, for the economic value, the resources that benefit our market economy will just be incinerated. Less resources for medication, crops, and other consumptive uses. And smoke and fumes from fire may harm the environment in the moment.
Another pro related to erosion is that by letting these fires burn, it would prevent major erosion because the bigger trees will die, enabling the undergrowth to sprout and keeping the soil intact. No erosion means a better forest.
Well, if we do put it out, undergrowth will die and the soil will erode.
Another pro regarding population sizes is that letting forest fires burn will provide an environmental factor to limit population explosion. This will keep the ecosystem more stable and benefit the environment.
That's a very good point. Ian?
Well, for the population sizes, the populations will temporarily be smaller, but visitors won't see the animals, which will decrease the value of the property and also put it into an economic downturn.
When we're talking about succession, the already fertile soil in the forest will allow secondary succession to take its course after the fire.
Well, regarding succession, huge fire would kill all the soil, while destroying the bacteria that promotes the growth of these plants and promotes the growth of animals to come in. And 75% of forest burns every 20 years, then that's going to be a problem.
Another very good point. Mitchell?
Thanks, Louis. Last but not least, when we're talking about this let burn policy, we can't help but mention biodiversity. By letting these forest fires take their course, forest fires won't grow big enough for invasive species to take over the ecosystem after the fire is out.
Concerning biodiversity, fires threaten the biodiversity because once these native species are wiped out by the fire, invasive species will come in and take over.
Overall, this let burn policy is a great thing that needs to be implemented in our country immediately. All of Ian's points are wrong, and I'm right. This has been Mitchell Morell, Louis Hamadi, and Ian Smith on the Nelson News Network. We're tuning out.
I know when that hotline blink.
All of his points are wrong.
One thing. I know when that hotline blink. That can only mean one thing. Ever since I left the city, you got a reputation for